Words. Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. This is our continuation of the Illumination of the Intent class. We're going to begin with a couple of prayers, as we've done each class. So taking refuge in generating bodhicitta, this verse was said to have been composed by Atisha. At least there is a tradition that says it was composed by him. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. Through the collections I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all migrators. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. Through the collections I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all migrators, all migrating beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened. So this is a special Mahayana refuge, not just taking refuge this lifetime, but until I'm enlightened, to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly, which means the Bodhisattva Aryas. Due to the collections I create, the collections of merit and wisdom, through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit migrating beings. And then short mandala. So you can imagine the whole universe, that you have some karmic input in all the things that can be perceived of the universe, even though you may not be the owner of them, the mountains and the trees and the forests and other planets and black holes and so forth. You have some part in the collective karma of their appearance. So you can offer all of these by offering this ground, imagined and anointed with perfume and strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, the four continents, the sun and the moon, visualized as a Buddha realm. May all migrators enjoy such a pure realm. And as part of that, we make requests to the Dharmakaya, our primordial guru. O holy and perfect pure Lama, from the clouds of compassion that form in the skies of your Dharmakaya wisdom, please send down a rain of vast and profound Dharma, precisely in accordance with the needs of those to be trained. Idam Guru Radna Mandalakam Niryatayami. Thank you. And we'll begin with a short meditation to calm our minds and to further set a motivation. So sitting comfortably with your spine erect, relax your body, relax your mind. Remind yourself you don't have to think about anything else right now. Shanka's dogs have already gone off to the vet. Place your attention on your respiration. Pay attention to that without controlling it. And once you've recognized it, hold it in mind with the mental factor mindfulness. Still within that, recognizing when you're breathing in and when you're breathing out, to the exclusion of all other thoughts. Don't attend to other thoughts. See if you can even let go of your mind paying attention to the presence of your body that seems to be looming there. That's appearing to your mental consciousness through paying attention to your body sense power. By taking your attention away from other thoughts, worries, plans, and so forth, taking your attention away from your body, your ego, you're in a sense defamiliarizing. Rather than familiarizing with something because you do it again and again, you're letting go of paying attention to them. Then as the mind has become a little quieter, bring your attention to a subtler object than the breathing. Let go of your attention to the breathing and pay attention to your mental consciousness. In particular, its conventional nature of being clear light, not forming any obstruction to the arisal or removal of data to your mind, whether those might be emotional states or images or thoughts, memories, plans. In between the thoughts, around the thoughts, even where the thoughts are, the mind has a nature of this conventional clear light. It doesn't have a shape or color. It's not the object of your eye consciousness. We can develop all qualities that we as yet do not have. We can get rid of every fault of our mind because they are not the nature of our mind. They are just adventitious stains, things that arise due to causes and conditions. This is our developmental Buddha nature, developmental Buddha lineage. we can become Buddhas. We can, as the Tibetans take the etymology, Sangye, Sang meaning eliminating, having eliminated all the faults. Ge means having increased, developed all of the good qualities. We have the ability to become real, authentic human beings. Beings that are aiming to benefit others, having first avoided harming them. We have to start from our tendency to harm other sentient beings, to eliminate that from our mind, and then to develop the good qualities, wisdom, compassion. We can find real peace of mind, independent of our temporal situation right now, especially in expanding our attention to the welfare of other living beings, all of whom are exactly equal with us in having this Buddha nature. When we put our hands at our heart, we say namaste to others, or greetings. We're greeting not their particular situation right now, whether they be a scoundrel or a saint. We're paying homage to their Buddha nature, that they can become enlightened. This situation, to be able to recognize this, is due to our unique auspicious moment right now, what the Buddha called auspicious moment, which also called a life of leisure and endowment. When karma has come together, that we're born as a human with all our senses intact, with faith in the Dharma existing as having been taught in the world, spiritual friends and community that support us, benefactors, and our own faith, or at least hope, that by practicing this path, we can find everlasting happiness. And we can, with this life of leisure and endowment, find liberation from cyclic existence. Or we can go further, taking cognizance of all other living beings who've been our mother numberless times in the past, who've been depthlessly kind. Just due to the time situation right now, we don't recall those kindnesses, our indebtedness to them. Thinking it would be reprehensible to achieve liberation for my own self alone, that I must become fully actualized. I must become a Buddha to really repay their kindness, to lead them out of suffering, set them into happiness. To do so requires the great collections of merit and wisdom. So with that thought in mind, think I'm going to participate in the class today. With that thought in mind, to achieve enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings, I'm going to listen to the teachings, contemplate them, weigh them in my mind, And when moments arise of clarity about some point, hold it single-pointedly, meditate on it, in order to accumulate the causes, collection of merit and collection of wisdom, to achieve enlightenment for the sake of all my mother sentient beings, my former mothers, my future mothers. I'm going to participate in the class in order to achieve enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings. And then bring your attention back to the present. I see a couple of names I don't recall before. Violet, I know in Singapore. James Harrison, were you here before?
No, this is my first time.
Hi, James. Where are you?
Charlottesville, Virginia.
Oh, okay. Good to have you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So any questions from left over from last time? Nadine, you have any questions? No? Okay. Anna?
Hi, Venerable George. So far, so good.
So far, so good. So we haven't done anything. So that's not very far, but at least it's good. Okay. Okay. Don, anything?
No, thanks.
Venerable Tendran, we missed you. I understood you were at teachings. Have you caught up a little bit in the
Yes.
process? Yeah. Any questions?
Yes, thank you. Not at the moment.
Okay. 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 So,
Venerable,
yes.
maybe
Yes.
at the end of the class, if I can have 5 minutes to talk about what I found about Jayananda.
Oh, okay. Definitely.
Okay, thank you.
Jayananda was the Indian commentator, the only Sanskrit commentary that we have to, other than Chandrakirti's self-commentary, his Bhasham to the Karikas. Jayananda is the only other commentary to that. So he wrote a commentary to the Karikas and to Chandrakirti's Bhasham that Lama Tsong depends on. So forth. Okay, so Shankar's going to have some information about that for us. So we're going to begin from where I left off last time. I'd almost spent the last class reiterating the class before that because it was a bit complicated. And I'm going to start with these words. The meaning of these points presented above seem especially difficult to comprehend. Right? Or as Jeffrey says, it's very difficult to understand the meaning of these statements. From the sutras that seem to indicate that the Shravakas and Pratika Buddhas definitely have to realize emptiness. And so we're going to start there. Does anyone have the page number of that?
81. 80, George.
80. Okay. So people who are in the
81, I think.
81. Okay. 81. So we're in the meaning of these points presented above seem especially difficult to comprehend. Even those who typically rely on this tradition of Chandrakirti, the tradition of the Madhyamaka Vatara, Tibetan scholars generally, and Shantideva's works. So when it says Shantideva's works, that would mean the Bodhisattva Charyavatara and the Shiksha Samuchaya, his compendium of trainings, right? Even those who rely upon those appear to have struggled to explain them well, to explain And Jeffrey says, have not explained them well. Jimpa couches as they've struggled to explain them well. That seems to imply, Jimpa's translation seems to imply they've struggled, but they have explained them well. But Jeffrey's is more authentic to what Lama Tsong is saying. They haven't explained them well. So to critically examine this issue of whether Shravakas and Pratika Buddhas possess the realization of emptiness, I will present here, this is Lama Tsongkhapa talking, how the doubt arises in the first place and how to resolve it. Okay? So, question. It is certainly the case that one can and does establish by means of a valid cognition the 16 characteristics of the Four Noble Truths, such as impermanence and selflessness. The latter here, that is selflessness, understood in terms of being the absence of a substantially existent self-sufficient person that is neither identical with nor separate from the aggregates. And his note to this, Jimpa says, note 142 says, in this classification, each of the four Arya truths. What are the four Arya truths, Stephen? What does that mean?
Venerable George, the truth of suffering, the truth of the origination of suffering, the truth of cessation of suffering, and then the path to achieve that. Those are the
Right.
four.
So he calls them Arya truths here. Often we call them noble truths. It's the same thing. It's just translating Arya by the word noble. You know, we could say that literally it's when we say Pakpe Demba, the Arya truths or the noble truths. So each of them is divided into four aspects. Those of you who've studied some before may know this quite well. Say, for instance, the first noble truth is four aspects: impermanence, suffering, emptiness, or literally empty. Jimpich says emptiness, empty, and selfless. These are to counteract certain misconceptions about each of the noble truths, like the first noble truth, the truth of suffering, right? Dugnel Demba. The first aspect is to overcome the idea that sufferings are permanent, so that you understand that they themselves are momentary. They're impermanent. The second one, sufferings are suffering. So you might say that's a no-brainer, right? Sufferings are suffering. What it means is that, say for instance, when we talk about suffering, we usually talk about three kinds of suffering: suffering of suffering, suffering of change or changeable suffering, and all pervasive suffering. Suffering of change is what we usually call happiness or pleasure, right? So the second aspect of the first noble truth is saying even those things that fall under the truth of suffering, like contaminated happiness, they are themselves of the nature of suffering. And pervasive suffering, which is usually experienced as a neutral feeling, like, for instance, I have a body right now that's under the influence of karma and delusion. Right now, my body doesn't feel too bad. I have a little pain in the back of my spine, but other than that, not so bad. Even that neutral feeling is of the nature of suffering, because in any subsequent moment, it can change into suffering of suffering or changeable suffering. Okay, so those are the first two aspects: overcoming wrong ideas about suffering. And then the last two aspects are empty and selfless. And it's these two aspects that are sort of in debate here. What the lower tenets mean by empty, and selfless. So Jimpa said, it is certainly the case that one can and does establish by means of a valid cognition the 16 characteristics, or more precisely, we say 16 aspects of the Four Noble Truths. So what does he mean by that? We can establish by means of a valid cognition. Do you know what a valid cognition is? Anna, do you know what a valid cognition is?
Venerable, is it on the basis of logic and reasoning?
Uh,
Inference, like inferential?
It can be. A valid cognition doesn't have to be. Say, for instance, I see the trees outside my window with my eye consciousness. That doesn't have to depend on any kind of logic. We use logic to establish the validity of subtle objects. Sometimes some things, like I have a valid cognition of color and shape that doesn't depend on logic, but you're right in that certain things that are more hidden, we need to use logic to establish their validity, that they're actually true. So in this respect, I'll finish that sentence. So it is certainly the case that one can and does establish, actually the text just says that one can establish them. Jeffrey Hopkins' translation of that line says, one can definitely ascertain these with valid cognition, these 16 aspects of the Four Noble Truths, such as impermanence and selflessness. So what has he done there? He's taken the first one, impermanence, and he skipped to the last one, right? Selfless. Impermanent, suffering, empty, and selfless. So these just sort of indicating those four by those two words, the first one and the last one. The latter here, understood in terms of the absence or the lack of a substantially existent self-sufficient person that is neither identical with nor separate from the aggregates. Okay. When this happens, when one has established that with valid cognition, those 16 aspects. So the other truths, the truth of the origin of suffering has 4 aspects. The truth of cessation of suffering has 4 aspects. The truth of the path has 4 aspects also. We're not talking about those right now, but there are 16, and you can realize them with valid cognition. When this happens, it will also emerge that the principal trainees of such a path will come to cultivate great familiarity with such understanding of selflessness, with such an understanding of selflessness, maybe. You become familiar with what selflessness is. When we talk about achieving nirvana or the path in the Hinayana, let's say, the main thing that's talked about is realizing the 4 noble truths. That's said to be the path, right? Even in the Mahayana, we say the main path to achieve realization, to overcome the delusions and to eventually achieve Buddhahood, is the first step is realizing the 4 noble truths. Sometimes we may have heard the main thing you have to do is realize emptiness, right? Well, emptiness is one of these aspects of the first truth, the truth of suffering, right? And in a sense, from the Mahayana point of view, it's the main one. From the Hinayana point of view, they talk about selfless as being the main one. Okay. When this happens, when you've realized these 16 aspects with valid cognition, the principal trainees of such a path So that means not just the people who are casually scholars or thinking about it, but who are actually practicing it. The principal trainees of such a path will come to cultivate great familiarity with such an understanding of selflessness. So this is talking about mainly from the Hinayana point of view. And if this can happen, if they can become familiar with the aspect of selflessness, the lack of a self-supporting, substantially existent person, according to the lower tenets. And if this can happen, then a direct realization of the selflessness of persons can be established through the reasoning that proves how yogic direct perception is possible. Okay, so this was a question that, where is he now? Richard Einhorn had asked before we started class. So what is this talking about? You may notice on the Facebook group page that Doris put up maybe a week before, this little compendium I put up of how does one establish yogic direct perceivers exist? So what is a yogic direct perceiver? There are different kinds of direct perceivers. Direct perceivers are consciousnesses which do not depend upon a mental image. They're not thought consciousnesses. So we have an eye direct perceiver, we have ear, nose, tongue, taste direct perceiver, body direct perceiver. We also have mental direct perceivers, mental consciousnesses that know their objects not through a mental image, as we usually, our mind usually only knows things by means of thinking about them, by conception, right? Here we're talking about perception as opposed to conception. Conceptual minds are mental consciousnesses. There's no conception in the eye, ear, nose, tongue, or body, right? It's not as though your eye thinks that some boy or girl is attractive, or that this ice, or your tongue thinks that the ice cream is good. It's your mind that thinks those things, right? But so mental direct perceivers do exist, and a particular subset of mental direct perceivers, well, let's say some direct perceivers, for instance, like the ability to know others' minds with your mental consciousness. That's a mental direct perceiver, but is not a yogic direct perceiver. Yogic direct perceivers are mental consciousnesses that know significantly important principles or facts that are relevant to progress on the path, such as subtle impermanence, selflessness of phenomena, or selflessness of persons, emptiness of persons and phenomena. It knows them directly without the need of a mental image. How do you achieve those mental direct perceptions that are called yogic direct perceptions? You do it through familiarity, first of all, having a mental image of, let's say, subtle impermanence, or a mental image of a selflessness of persons, or a mental image of emptiness. And by familiarity with that, one comes to have eventually a direct perception of it. Okay, so I'll read from, some of you might know this book, Mind in Tibetan Buddhism. It says Lati Rinpoche and Elizabeth Napper. Lati Rinpoche was the main teacher that Elizabeth Napper, Betsy Napper, received teachings from on this subject on the various texts. And but she's the author. She's actually the one who composed it, right? So in that, on pages 63 and 64 comes the following. How does one establish that a yogic direct perceiver exists? how can you establish that you can know with your mental consciousness, subtle impermanence, selflessness of persons, and emptiness directly? How can you establish that? Yogic direct perceivers. And the text continues, if the wisdom cognizing selflessness, that's mainly what we're talking about here from the Hinayana point of view, right? If the wisdom cognizing selflessness is cultivated without separating from the conditions of meditation, one can attain very clear perception of the object of meditation. That is, one can come to realize it directly without relying on an image. So what that means is, how do you realize, first of all, how do you have a first realization, or how do you cognize selflessness? You cognize or realize selflessness by analyzing, thinking about it, all of which is intellectual activity, conceptual activity, based on a mental image of selflessness. Your mental image of selflessness may be completely wrong at the beginning, but by analyzing, listening to teachings, reading, debating with others, and so forth, you develop a more and more factually concordant mental image of selflessness. When your mental image is in accordance with reality, in accordance with a fact, it's no longer, it's got misconceptions about it. You can have a realization of selflessness. You have a mental image of selflessness. The actual selflessness is something that you're knowing via that mental image, right? So if the wisdom cognizing or realizing selflessness is cultivated without separating from the conditions of meditation. So you're in a meditative session, you're analyzing about selflessness, you have a realization of selflessness, you're knowing correctly selflessness via this mental image. One can come to realize it directly. That is, without the mediation of the mental image through which you're knowing it right now, kind of like the, rose-colored glasses that you're knowing something outside, or like the example that I've given many times, mental image is like those little positive images that are in the thing you had as a child with the Grand Canyon or the Eiffel Tower. You would turn the wheel and you would see different images from the two eyes. You weren't actually seeing the Eiffel Tower or whatever, the Statue of Liberty. It's as though it seemed to you, you were seeing it through the medium of that image. So in a similar way, it's as though via the mental image, you are cognizing selflessness. It's said that can be an actual realization of selflessness, but selflessness itself is not the main thing that's appearing to your mind. The main thing that's appearing to your mind is the mental image. One can, however, attain a very clear perception of the object of meditation. That is to say, one can come to realize it directly without relying on the image. The image can disappear. And because its basis is stable and is a mental phenomenon that does not require renewed exertion with respect to that which has already become conditioned. Well, that sentence ends there with a period. So what does that mean? Its basis is stable. The mental consciousness that you're using to try to realize selflessness is something that's stable. And it is a mental phenomenon that does not require renewed exertion with respect to which it has already become conditioned. So if you become conditioned or familiarized with selflessness, so you get up, you have a cup of tea, you have to go to the toilet, you have to take the dogs to the vet or whatever, you come back and you're in meditation again. It's not as though you have to again exert yourself from scratch to have that cognition of selflessness. You've already reached a certain level, and you can go back to that level. Like, say, for instance, the example of what's it called? Not a vaulter. What do we call high jumper? Someone was mentioning, I think it was before the class, Richard mentioned that the record was what, 8 foot 4 inches? Richard?
I think it was 8 feet, 0.046 inches.
Okay, so essentially 8 feet. So
Yes,
someone probably less than 6 feet tall, running at this bar like in the Olympics or some big tournament, can jump without a vault, without a pole. They can jump up 8 feet. That's really amazing. But when you do that, it's not as though the next time you're going to try to vault that you can start from 8 feet, and whatever exertion you do then increases it like to 16 feet or something like that. You have to start from scratch again. Whereas with the mind, which is a clear phenomena, is not material, you don't have to start from scratch. You already have some understanding of selflessness upon which you can increase. So I'll just read finish reading here. It does not require renewed exertion with respect to that which has already become conditioned or familiarized. Its basis is stable because the mind cognizing selflessness has as its basis clear light. Now that's a phrase you're familiar with from our meditation at the beginning, right? The clear light nature of the mind. The fact that the mind is not, well, it has several implications. The mind is not material. The mind, say for instance, Western scientists think that the mind is the brain, is the actual material of the brain, form. Clear light indicates that consciousness is of a different nature than material. It's impermanent. Consciousness is impermanent. And there are said to be 3 kinds of impermanent phenomena. Form, which is mainly what we see and hear and taste and touch and experience of the world. Consciousness, which is of a different continuum than form. And those phenomena that are impermanent, that are neither form nor consciousness. What's an example of that? Venerable Tendrin, do you know something that's impermanent, that's not form nor consciousness?
Time.
You unmuted for a microsecond there.
Time.
Time, yeah, time's impermanent. That's neither form nor, yeah. Classic example is the person. Venerable Tendrin is not form, is not mind. It's what's called a non-associated compositional factor. So it's impermanent. So here we're talking about consciousness. Its basis is clear light. Consciousness did not require or depend on renewed exertion, because once one has become conditioned to it, familiarized with something, it arises automatically. Whereas, with the jumping, whatever that's called, it's not called pole vaulting because it needs a pole. What is it called? High jumping. With high jumping, even though you're accustomed to jumping 8 feet before, you can't start from 8 feet. You have to start from the ground level again. It is unlike, for instance, high jumping, where no matter how much you practice, each time you jump, you must again make effort. Okay, so that's the first reason here. The reasoning establishing yogic direct perceivers is necessary, for otherwise one could not establish the existence of omniscience and so forth. How do you become omniscient? By having a yogic direct perceiver of selflessness and emptiness, enhancing that, enhancing your bodhicitta and so forth through direct perception. If when cultivating the wisdom realizing selflessness, one does not become separate from the conditions for cultivating it, that is, you don't, leave your meditation session, you're still in the meditation session. If one does not become separate from the conditions for cultivating it and becomes thoroughly conditioned to it, thoroughly familiar with it, it is possible to extend it endlessly. Its increase is immeasurable. That's one of the incredible qualities of our mind when we talk about the conventional Buddha nature, right? The developmental Buddha nature. All of these qualities can be extended, increased immeasurably. Whereas for other activities like high jumping, there is a measure, a limit to how skilled one can become. I don't know, maybe you think you could jump 24 feet, if the world record is 8 feet, 0.004 inches, whatever it was, Richard found, maybe you think, oh, I can do better than that. There is a limit how skilled one can become. The difference is that one does not have to depend on renewed effort for those things to which the mind has become familiarized. Okay, makes sense so far? Rachel, making sense? Yeah, okay. So this is referring, and in Jimpa's note about this, where is it here? When he said, and if this can happen, then a direct realization of the selflessness of persons can be established through the reasoning that proves how yogic direct perception is possible. So we just gave from Lati Rinpoche's book, just a very short thing, but in note 143 in Thupten Jimpa's translation, he says, this is a reference to the reasoning outlined in the second chapter of Dharmakirti's exposition of valid cognition, the Pramanavartika, especially verses chapter 2, 121 and to 131, establishing how what is initially an inferential knowledge could culminate in a direct realization. Okay, so maybe some of you are familiar with this book. Richard, do you have this book? Is enlightenment possible?
I do. I've read part of it. It's a little, I would say, beyond my ability to read by myself. I tried and
Yeah.
gave up.
Kind of like,
I haven't.
kind of like illumination of the intention. You need some commentary for it. So,
You bet.
yeah, so in this text, which our dear friend Roger Jackson translated when he was, I think this was his PhD thesis, I can't remember, with Geshe Zopa. So it is a little stilted in some places, but if you look at this book around page 312, 313, but I have taken those verses that Jimpa referred to, 222, chapter 2, 121 to 131, and I have put them in this document that's on the Facebook page. So I'm going to read a little bit about this. So I've changed a couple of words in this. So this starts, first of all, it starts from 120, which is the opponent's argument. So the reasoning starts with 121, but 120 says, if you Buddhists say that through familiarization, one can attain excellence in various qualities. They cannot transcend their natures infinitely. This is the opponent's argument. Just as in jumping and boiling water, the increases, you cannot do infinitely. You cannot jump infinitely, and you cannot boil water infinitely. Why not? Ida, do you have any idea what he's talking about? Why water can't be boiled infinitely?
It will just consume. It will
Yeah, it'll be
evaporate.
consumed. If you're like me and you forgot that you had water boiling on the stove, you went into your room and later you start smelling some smoke, you realize that all the water evaporated and now the pan is beginning to melt or something like that. So those are the two qualms. He said that you can't increase infinitely, and they cannot transcend their natures infinitely, as in the case of jumping, where you can't jump higher, and in the case of boiling water, where you consume the basis. Okay, so verse 121, which is supposedly the beginning of the argument to prove yogic direct perceivers, is what Thupten Jinpa mentioned as the beginning of this argument. So it says, if mental qualities were dependent on repeated effort or had an unstable basis, remember, we've already talked about the basis is the mind, right? Which is stable. If mental qualities were dependent on repeated effort or had an unstable basis, then their excellence could not increase. But, however, that's not their nature. You don't have to have repeated effort to develop bodhicitta, love, for instance. Once you've developed love in meditation, of course, you may lose it over time because of not paying attention. But once you've developed that, it's not as though the next time you encounter something unattractive, some unattractive person, that you don't have love. You've already familiarized with that, right? If mental qualities were dependent on repeated effort, you don't have to again develop love for them. You already have that. Or if it had an unstable basis, if the mind was dissipated, then their excellence could not increase. But their nature is not like that. Okay, so then verses 122 and 123 up to the second line of 123. So it's like 6 lines. The ability to jump is limited, right? We're talking about the high jumping, because what is able to assist it earlier is unable to prove helpful in later attainment of excellence. What was able to assist it earlier, what was that? Maybe just the legs thrusting on the ground, reaching up and twisting around. That is unable to prove helpful in later attainment of excellence. So, you can't, what assisted you earlier you can't start from where you reached at that point, like having a platform that was 8 feet off the ground that you now start your next jump from. And although the boiling water can increase in intensity, right? You start heating it up, little bubbles, and more is steaming. It does not have a nature such as to be infinite, because the basis does not remain. It's evaporated, right? The mind is not like either of those examples. So then it continues. Once there has been familiarization, I think Roger used the word, I can't remember, what is it? If you had the book, did you read?
Cultivation, I think he says.
Did he say, I think he said Which one is this? 155. 121. Oh, I thought I had this already bookmarked here. He said something that's not an English word. Anyway, I think he said something like accommodation or something like that. 104. Sorry. I think I gave you the wrong page number before because I had it. Okay. So this is talking about one. Oh, maybe not.
I think it's page 310 in Enlightenment is Possible, Venerable
Yeah.
George, 310 to 311. Oh,
310.
accustomation.
Accustomation, yeah. Instead of what he means is familiarization. That's what usually how we translate the Tibetan term there. The ability to jump is limited because what is able to assist it earlier is unable to prove helpful in later attainment of excellence. And although the boiling of water can increase in intensity, it does not have a nature such as to be infinite because its basis does not remain. Then here's where we left off. Once it has been familiarized, once there has been familiarization, effort will make other later efforts more excellent without being dependent on repeated effort. So that's a quality of the mind. Once you've developed an understanding of selflessness, you don't have to start from scratch again as though your mind was a blank blackboard, putting up the reasonings again. You already can start from there, unlike high jumping, right? Compassion, etc. So here, Dharmakirti was not referring only to realization of selflessness, but the increase of all of the other qualities that are significant in the Mahayana path leading up to Buddhahood. Compassion and so forth arise through familiarization in the mind. They will naturally enter the mind as fire and so forth enters wood. What does that mean? When you burn wood, it sort of encompasses the wood, and mercury enters gold. So this is talking about some alchemy kind of process, right? Therefore, what arises through that mental familiarization are qualities arising as the nature of the mind. Thus, each subsequent effort produces even greater excellence. How can those minds of compassion, etc., remain limited when they are familiarized with through the two applications? This is commentary, I think, from parenthetically from the commentary of Gyaltsabje, one of Lama Tsongkhapa's disciples, who wrote a commentary on the Pramanavartika that Roger Jackson's book is based on. How can the minds of compassion remain limited when they are familiarized with, and how are they familiarized? Through the two applications of consistency, pak, which means, doing something again and again and again, like permanent, and intensity, gu, because they increase from the seed of the previous appropriate similar type. I think, again, Roger used some, I think what did he call it? Did you have the text there, Paul? No, okay, that doesn't matter. He used some term.
Homogenes.
Homogene, yeah. So the Tibetan is rikta, similar type. If it is not the case that jumps, high jumping, originate from jumps as compassion from compassion. A jump has a nature such that it is limited because its causes, strength, exertion, and so forth have limited ability. That that being does not at first jump as far as they later will because of physical imbalances. One clears away imbalances through gradual effort, but jumping still remains limited by the limits of one's own strength. Sean, I'm just going to finish this paragraph, okay, and then we'll get to you. Compassion originates from its own seeds. It has a nature such that it naturally enters into the mind. This that what I was talking earlier about fire entering into wood and so forth. That it naturally enters into the mind when it possesses a cause that is its own seed and is not damaged by opposing factors. Thus, as for those other subsequent minds, the mental dharmas of compassion, mental phenomena of compassion and detachment and so forth, the root of their clarification is previous familiarization. A compassionate nature occurs through familiarization, like detachment, attachment, and aversion. So we can become, we can have occurrence of detachment because of familiarization with detachment. On the other hand, we can have familiarization with attachment, craving, wanting things because of familiarization with that. And we can have familiarization with anger and aversion because of being, familiarized with it. The Dalai Lama says, don't meditate on anger. Don't familiarize yourself with anger thinking, oh, it's okay, it helps me, because then you become familiarized with it and it will occur more easily. So I thought it was worthwhile mentioning that because it's mentioned by Lama Tsongkhapa, and Jimpa actually quotes that section from the Pramanavartika. Sean, what's your thought?
Well, I guess the first thing that comes, there's several thoughts, but
Good.
one of the things is that you made a few comments, so you said one, that mind is of a different substance than material.
Right.
But that wasn't demonstrated.
Right, that's a different argument.
And
We talked about that before.
And you would also have to demonstrate that the mind is not able to be extinguished.
No,
Because
it says exhausted.
Well, okay,
yeah.
whatever. Yeah, that's what I meant. But
Yeah.
so
Sort of like you might think, oh, I can't meditate anymore. My mind is exhausted. Something like that.
well,
It doesn't mean ended like at the time of death. It's talking. So
but I think when they're given a description of water, you're saying that the water can't boil indefinitely because it just evaporates.
exactly.
So, but you didn't demonstrate that the mind also can't evaporate.
Has your mind evaporated ever, Sean?
Not in this lifetime. but
So
that's
what would
where
be the analog here?
that's where materialists would say, well, when the brain stops, the mind's going to stop.
No, that's talking about the end. This is talking about just during, sort of using your mind from something. We would say, I don't want to think about it anymore. I'm exhausted. It's talking about, being worn out like that. So the mind, although it might seem at first, like say, for instance, when you're given your first class in calculus or trigonometry or maybe even arithmetic or something, you might think, I can't take anymore. My mind can't do anymore. But you can, by familiarization, your mind is not actually reached a point where it can't do anymore. You might think, I can't do anymore. You can, you just have to familiarize with that because the mind itself is not boiled away by effort. You know, it doesn't sort of evaporate because of being used. That's the point here. The other point about being of a different continuum than material, I've alluded to before, and especially with your doubts, your qualms about, you know, reincarnation and whether the mind can continue. So the basic argument revolves around first having a recognition, a realization of the clear light nature of the mind. Like in the meditation that we do, recognizing that one instant of mind arises from the previous instant of mind. There's never a thought that occurs or a mental event that occurs or a conscious event, whether it be I or whatever, that didn't arise from a previous instant of consciousness. If you follow back your present life right now, your present thoughts, your present life, to what happened yesterday, you can go back, you know, at 11:30, I went to bed. I went to bed much later than that, but let's say I went to bed at 11:30. I was thinking this, and before that I was thinking this, and before that I turned on the TV, I was listening to that. Before that I was reading the, you know, my text. Before that, you can go back all of the events of yesterday until the morning time yesterday. The first thought that you had, it arose from the sleep state, kind of like analogous to a previous life, analogous to the intermediate state between lives. And then you can recall the last moment of the night before that. You can go back all through your life, always finding an analogous, you know, every instant of mind arose from a previous instant of mind, all the way back to the time of conception. Now, most of us right now don't have a concentration enough to go all the way back to conception. Can you remember anyone here can remember being in the womb? Karen doesn't. Rachel, do you remember being in the womb? No. Shanka?
1 year old, but not the womb.
1 year, okay. I can remember a little bit younger than one, I think. Ida, can you remember? What's your earliest memory?
Yes, I can. I remember when I took my first steps.
Okay.
Clearly, by myself.
Good
Stepping
for
on
you.
a,
Okay. But that was like when you were already several months old, right? Or
yeah, about a year old.
okay.
Mhm. That's
Mikhail,
my,
do you remember what's your earliest memory? Mikhail.
Oh, very, very old. I think 3 or 4.
Oh, okay.
Only.
Okay. Nadine, do you remember anything really early?
I remember when I was 2 years and my sister was born and my mother was in the hospital and I was like this and she was in the window and it was 2 years old.
Okay. So does anyone remember being in the womb or in the hospital when they were born? Some people do. Donnie, you don't? No, okay. So it is possible through familiarization and concentration to go all the way back to the first mental events of this lifetime, to recall them. Now, Sean may not believe this, but this is the experience of meditators. On the basis of that, sort of like the continuity from today, going back, everything that happened yesterday, the day before, the last year, the year before, down to one, to the time of womb. By the force of that continuity, one can make the jump from the first thought of this life to the last thought of last life. This is one of the ways that one can actually have a perception of the existence of past lives. All this depends upon having a realization of the clear light nature of the mind. So that's something that can be established in your own meditation. Okay, so I'm not going to dwell any more on that right now. So just this is finishing up this section where it said this question. It is certainly the case that one can and does establish by means of valid cognition the 16 characteristics, the 16 aspects of the Four Noble Truths, such as impermanence and selflessness. The latter here understood in terms of being the absence of a substantially existent self-sufficient person that is neither identical with nor separate from the aggregates. Oh, we went beyond that. And when this happens, it will also emerge that the principal trainees of such a path will come to cultivate great familiarity with such understanding of selflessness. And you remember in Dharmakirti's proof, he was talking about familiarization being the factor that could bring about this yogic direct perception. And if this can happen, then a direct realization of the selflessness of persons can be established through the reasoning that proves how yogic direct perception is possible. And in his note to that, he was referring to these verses that we just read. If so, if you can establish yogic direct perception, that means you can have a direct realization of selflessness, it will then follow that such a path of seeing, remember what we said, the defining characteristic of the path of seeing, entering the path of seeing, is when you have a direct perception of selflessness or emptiness. It will follow that such a path of seeing, realizing such selflessness, can eliminate the acquired afflictions, the intellectually acquired afflictions, because on the path of seeing, you have true cessation of the intellectually formed or acquired afflictions, right? Not the innate afflictions. It's not until you have exited the path of seeing and next meditate, and when you've entered into the path of meditation, that you start to eliminate the innate afflictions. So when he says acquired, it means intellectually acquired. It will follow that such a path of seeing, realizing selflessness, can eliminate the acquired afflictions. When this is established, then the path of meditation, wherein the selflessness of persons that has already been directly seen is made familiar. When we talk about path of, what did he call it here? Path of meditation. It's also called the path of cultivation or familiarization, because the word meditation can mean also to familiarize or cultivate. So it's a path upon which you're familiarizing yourself with what you saw on the path of seeing, or you're meditating on that, familiarizing with it. Wherein the selflessness of persons that has already been directly seen in the path of seeing is made familiar or cultivated, it becomes established as well. You can establish the path of meditation. This means then that such a path can eliminate even the innate afflictions, which are the objects of abandonment on the path of meditation, the innate afflictions, not just the acquired ones, thus establishing the possibility of the cessation of all contaminant afflictions. Well, we would say contaminated afflictions. Contaminant afflictions. In that case, it would follow that even without realizing emptiness, this is the Hinayana assertion, right? You don't have to realize emptiness. You can just meditate on selflessness of the lack of a self-supporting, substantially existent person. In that case, it would follow that even without realizing emptiness that you Mahayanas are talking about, one can eliminate all the afflictions of the three realms together with their seeds. This would be so because the eliminations affected by means of the two paths, the path of seeing that eliminates the acquired afflictions, and the path of meditation that eliminates, abandons the innate afflictions. The path of seeing, the path of meditation would have taken place in the manner of, as described above, eliminating afflictions through the supramundane path. The Hinayana would call this the supramundane path. Mahayana would not say it's a supramundane path. They would say it's still a mundane path because it hasn't realized emptiness. It's only realized the gross selflessness of persons. Therefore, the assertion of the Hinayana is, even with the path contemplating the 16 characteristics, 16 aspects, such as impermanence and so forth, all of the afflictions can be eliminated. You see, he has an end quote there. That's where did that start? That's a question or an assertion of the Hinayana adherent, right? We following? Don, are you okay? Don? Who did I not call on? Shankar, are you looking at pictures of dogs or what? Oh, you're taking notes. Okay, good. I'm teasing. Shankar was worried earlier he might miss class because his dogs had to go to the vet. He sent me a picture of some monkey leading a dog. Anyway. Okay. Doris, are you following? Okay. So the reply, the answer to this qualm, kind of from the Hinayana point of view, that you don't need emptiness, is the following. Let me explain it like this. We, Prasangika, Mahayana Prasangika, do not say that if one has not found the view of suchness, we don't say that it would be impossible to establish the truth of the 16 characteristics, such as impermanence, permanence, suffering, empty, selfless. We don't say it's impossible. You can do that by means of valid cognition. And we don't say that the principal trainees of these paths cannot meditate on them with great effort, familiarizing with them, and on the basis of such meditation, directly perceive the coarse level of selflessness. The Hinayana would say it's the subtle selflessness, but we're not saying that you can't do that. You can realize this coarse level of selflessness and achieve familiarity with that which they have perceived. So don't bother us with saying that our position is that you can't do that. You can do that. So then the Hinayana replies, okay, then what are you saying? What do you say then? And again, the Mahayana replies, we say the path described, realizing the 16 attributes of impermanence and so forth, especially selflessness of persons, that is the lack of a self-supporting, substantially existent person. We say that the path described does not constitute a genuine, comprehensive realization of the selflessness of persons. It's not a full realization of the selflessness of persons. It's only a realization of the gross selflessness of persons, which we Mahayanas say does not abandon any of the delusions. You can realize those things, but that doesn't cause abandonment of the delusions. Okay, why? As such, this path, the path that Hinayana is proposing here, is neither the supramundane path of seeing nor the supramundane path of meditation. Supramundane means what? Going beyond the world, going beyond the mundane. It's not the supramundane. Usually supramundane from the Mahayana point of view means a realization of emptiness. So that just the realization of the selflessness of persons, the gross selflessness of persons, the lack of a self-supporting, substantially existent person, is not a supramundane realization. You can realize that there's no self-supporting, substantially existent person, but that doesn't constitute a supramundane path. And therefore, it cannot eliminate It cannot abandon, actually, as Jeffrey says, and as the Tibetan says, it cannot abandon the seeds of the objects of illumination by either the path of seeing or the path of meditation. That means to say, the path of seeing and the path of meditation are meant to abandon the afflictions, the delusions, the klesha, and their seeds so that they'll never come back again. Abandon them in that sense. This path that the Hinayana has proposed, realizing the gross selflessness of persons, which they call the subtle selflessness, the lack of a self-supporting substantial existence in person, realizing that you can do that, but that will not abandon the klesha or their seeds that are to be abandoned by the path of seeing and the path of meditation. We following? Karen? You together? Yeah? You'll be able to explain this to David? Oh, okay. Paul, you've got this, right? Okay. You'll be able to explain to Jennifer?
Sure.
Yeah, okay, good. So you're in a better position than Karen. Karen said she wouldn't be able to explain it to David. Okay. So here, the tradition of Chandrakirti would be to interpret such presentations that we just said, those statements about how such paths constitute the path of seeing and meditation, and those statements that we just read earlier, the Hinayana point of view, how they eliminate the objects of relinquishment, which means the objects of abandonment, together with their seeds, how at the end of these two paths, the Hinayana was saying, one attains the arhat state and so on. Chandrakirti would say these are provisional teachings, interpretable teachings, provisional teachings. How did Jeffrey translate this? 153. He says, however, the Madhyamikas explain that when progress on the 10 grounds, explanations that these are paths of seeing and of meditation, this Hinayana explanation, that these abandon the artificial and innate afflictions as well as their seeds, and that at their end one attains the state of a foe destroyer, are systems that require interpretation. So the Buddha taught various things, like he said, there is a self to some Brahmins in some circumstances in order to lead them, further along the path. Certain statements of the Buddha require interpretation. They're not definitive statements. So Chimpa says these are provisional teachings, or as Jeffrey says, they require interpretation. This is analogous, the text continues, to the following example. One might allow that Chittamatra's negation of indivisible atoms, what are we talking about here? Chittamatra school, right? The mind-only school, right? One of their very good observations is there do not exist indivisible atoms, sort of the smallest particle that is partless. Do you know this, Richard? Yeah. Was that a ice you were putting on your head or a book that you were trying to absorb? Okay. So
I just hit my head, that's all.
Oh, okay. So the Hinayana the Vaibhashika and Vaibhashika and Sautrantika talk about partless atoms. Some of the Sautrantikas that are related with the Chittamatra don't, but generally the Hinayana talks sometimes about indivisible atoms. Those are ultimate truths. They can't be divided. It's sort of like it doesn't have parts. There's no east side, west side. They're just indivisible. Chittamatra negates that. We've talked about in earlier classes of tenets and other things, right? So one might allow that the Chittamatra negation of indivisible atoms and external objects composed through aggregation of such atoms. So they negate the existence of external objects that are made of indivisible atoms, partless atoms. Yeah, we can say that that's true, as well as the negation of a subject that possesses a substance different from its objects. Now that's a little bit in error here. Jeffrey translates it a different way. Let's see here. Sorry. Okay, for instance, the Chittamatrans, Jeffrey says, established through valid cognition a refutation of partless particles Jimpa says indivisible. When we talk partless, that means it doesn't have an east side, a west side. Chittamatrans show that anything you can always say has parts. Okay, there's no, they refute partless particles. They refute an external world composed of partless particles, because if partless particles don't exist, an external world composed of them doesn't exist, right? And a subject that is a different entity from such an external world. That's external world doesn't exist, right? So you can refute that there is a subject that is a different substance from that. You can refute a subject that is a different entity from such an external world. Chimpa's translation doesn't quite get that. So you can actually establish these things. These things are true. There are no partless particles. There's no external world that is composed of partless particles, and there is no subject mind that is a different entity from such an external world, because such an external world doesn't exist. All those things can be established. The way Jimpa is saying it, it sounds like you can establish, you can negate a subject that possesses a substance different from its objects. Usually the Chittamatra view is that the subject mind and its objects are of one entity, right? Is that the case from Prasangika point of view, Paul?
No.
No, you can't prove that. Jimpa seems to be saying that you can prove that, but Jeffrey is making the case you can prove that there is no subject mind that's a different entity from such an external world composed of partless particles. That's something you can prove. Okay, so one might allow that the Chittamatra's negation of indivisible partless atoms and external objects composed through aggregation of such atoms, as well as its negation of a subject that possesses a substance different from its objects. Jeffrey Koch says different from that external world composed of partless particles. One might allow that can be established by means of valid cognition. We would say that you can prove that. Furthermore, one might allow that if a trainee tamed by such an approach were to cultivate familiarity with these truths he or she has perceived over a long period of time, they could come to have a direct insight direct realization, and that what was seen could be made familiar. The way that Jeffrey is saying, all of those things are true. You could have a direct realization. There's no external world composed of partless particles and so forth. There's no subject that's a different entity from them. However, the statements about how one can traverse the 10 bodhisattva grounds, as well as the 3 final stages on that basis, because Chittamatra is a Mahayana system, right? So it talks about the 10 grounds. It doesn't talk about just the Hinayana presentation. However, the statements about how one can traverse the 10 bodhisattva grounds, as well as the 3 final stages on the path on that basis, Jeffrey explains what the 3 paths, meaning the path of seeing, path of meditation, and path of no more learning. Okay, when it says as well as the 3 final stages of the path, that means the path of seeing, the path of meditation, the path of no more learning. Path of no more learning means Buddhahood, right? These a Madhyamaka would interpret as provisional. The same is true of the example cited above. So the Madhyamaka would say the Chittamatra view that realizing that there are no partless particles, there's no external world composed of partless particles, and there's no subject mind that's a different entity from an external world that's composed of those partless particles. Those can all be realized. Madhyamaka would say you could realize those facts, but they would not constitute traveling on the path of seeing, the path of meditation, and achievement of Buddhahood. Making sense? Rachel, you thinking? Good, okay. Donnie, what do you think? What's that label on your shirt, Donnie? You work for the ambulance or what? Oh, you taking?
Sorry, it's fake. It's some fashion thing that's supposed to look like a blue collar worker.
Oh,
It's fashion.
okay.
I will work at nothing but Dharma.
I thought you were an ambulance worker or something. It looks like something like that.
No, I used to be a paramedic, but now I do Dharma.
Okay, good for you. That's much better. Sean, you have another doubt.
Well, it's more of a question. So are you saying that when he says the Chittamatrans negate a subject, I'm reading from Jeffrey Hopkins' side,
right?
That they negate a subject that is a different entity from such an external world of partless particles,
right?
Or would that not entail that the subject and the objects are of some kind of same substance?
Only from that interpretation that it's this their argument. You know, what Lama Tsongkhapa is saying is that, and Jeffrey's translating there, that you could say that you could realize these things. You could realize there are no partless particles. That's because partless particles don't exist. You can have that realization. You can realize that there is no external world composed of partless particles. Sure. Because their partless particles don't exist, an external world composed of them doesn't exist. You could also realize that because that external world composed of partless particles doesn't exist, there's no subject mind, which is a different entity from it. You could refute that also. All of those things would be true. But the Chittamatra position generally is more than that. It says that it doesn't say simply that the subject mind is the same entity. They don't just refute that the subject mind is a different entity than an external world composed of partless particles. They say that the subject mind they refute that the subject mind is a different entity than external objects, without the proviso of those external objects being comprised of partless particles. They say there's every perception of an external object, like the tree out my window. There's a wasp on my window right now because I have the heat on. They still live in the wood in my cabin here. They say that any perception, say if I have a perception of that wasp, there's two of them, that perception, the consciousness, the subject mind, and the what appears to be an external object, a wasp, separate entity from that mind, that they are actually, Chittamata's position is that they are actually the same entity, only mind. All of the phenomena that we perceive as external are actually the entity of the mind. So you couldn't realize that from Prajnanika point of view, that's not the case. From the Prajnanika point of view, Madhyamaka point of view in general, although some subsects do talk about this, generally the Madhyamaka view, different than the Chittamatra, is that there is an external world, not composed of partless atoms, but there is an external world which is a different entity than the mind that perceives it. So that could not be realized. You wouldn't say that, how did Jimper say, one might allow. You wouldn't allow this. You wouldn't say that Prajnanika accepts that you can negate an external world that is a different entity than the mind. You would not, Prajnanika does not say this. Okay? You have to think about it a bit. Rachel, what do you think?
Well, I'm just wondering about the material, going back to that idea that the mind is not material, right? That they are different types of impermanent phenomena.
Right.
And if we're saying that they are, you can't oh, it just gets so confusing. But anyway, if that is what we're talking about here, is that why Madhyamaka in general cannot say we can refute this as different?
No. Prajnanika is saying that there is an external world, separate entity from the mind that perceives it. And that the argument that the Chittamatra has, Yogacara Chittamatra, that subject and object, the objects and the subjects that perceive those objects, the subject is defined in terms of its object, right? So the subject, eye consciousness, perceiving the robin, the object. Chittamatra says they are of one entity. They are not different. There's no external object, the robin existing out there that my eye consciousness sees, the subject eye, right? They are manifestations arising from the seeds on the alaya vijnana, what they call the foundation mind, right? Kunchi in Tibetan. They say that there is one seed for each perception, and that's when that seed ripens, it ripens as the appearance of an object that's external to the mind and the subject mind itself, but in reality, they are one entity. They are only mind. Prajnanika says that's not the case. There is an external world that this interpretation, in fact, there's a whole section in our text, in Chandrakirti and in Lama Tsongkhapa's exposition of it later, refuting the Chittamatra mind-only proposition that there is no external world. So that argument will come later, okay? Where's Rachel? She disappeared. Okay, anyway. Shanka.
Yeah, so I understand the bit about the Madhyamaka don't accepting, the mind and the external world being the same entity. My question is more about the specific thing where he says in this line that we just read, these Madhyamaka will interpret as provisional. Provisional, as we discussed earlier, means that it's it's subject to interpretation, not subject to interpretation, it requires interpretation, right?
Right.
But if the Madhyamikas say that this is not true, that the subject and the external world are of the same entity, right?
Madhyamaka doesn't say that. Madhyamaka says they are not the same entity.
Right, sorry, yes. So given the Madhyamaka statement, how can you say this is provisional? There is no interpretation here. It's just wrong, according to
No, but the Buddha said this. The Buddha said in the Lankavatara Sutra, all three rounds are mind only, chitta matra, okay? But they have to be interpreted.
Okay, that's
What
the
he-
bit
what
that
he was doing is just
that's not mentioned here. The Buddha said this. Okay.
Right. So you have to have some background. Okay.
Okay, now I understand.
So the Buddha said that all three realms are mind only and various sutras. In other sutras, he said the reason he said that was for particular purpose, was what we call an ulterior motive. Usually in the West, ulterior motive sounds something like condescending, right? Or not, that's not the right term. It's sort of like
deceiving.
Yeah, ulterior, yeah. But so the Buddha's ulterior motive was to show that in saying all three realms are mind only, is that the mind is principle. The mind is the principal cause of the three worlds in terms of creating karma, which then, let's say, collective karma, which arises in future times as the appearance of an external world, right? That seems to be inherently existent. So mind is the principle. That was his ulterior motive. That was his intention, you could say, his secret intention for those particular disciples to understand that the mind was the principal cause, not Ishvara, not other kinds of causes, Brahma or something like that, that certain people might think was the cause of the world. He was saying the mind is the principal cause. Does that help? That'll come later when we talk about the refutation of the Chittamatra.
Yes, thank you. I didn't understand the Buddha actually had said this. That's the
yeah.
I have one just quick question. When they use the technical term of the same nature, of the same entity,
right,
or of different entity, is that the same? Is that equivalent to saying of the same nature?
It's the same as saying the same substance. So the substance is one seed on the alaya vijnana, foundation consciousness according to Chittamatra, and that seed, when it ripens because it's one entity, just one seed. It ripens as though there is a subject that seems to be a different entity than the different substance than the object it's perceiving, like a consciousness that's different than the robin or the bluebird or something, whereas they are actually the same substance. They are actually the same entity for Chittamatra. So that's why they say Chittamatra. Matra means only.
Right, yeah.
Or mere. There's just mind. Okay, that the object is the same entity as the subject is the same entity as the object.
So then my, sorry for the other people who have their hands up. So then to just follow
Yeah, they're
up,
getting tired. I can see Anna's yellow hand is
falling down. Yeah,
slowing down. Richard's no, it's still up there. They're not tired.
So to follow up then, okay, so the Chitta Mantras say they're the same seed, they arise from the same seed, so they're the same entity, which is equivalent to saying the same substance. Now, to follow up,
They claim emptiness means the emptiness of being different substances. That's
Right.
what when they talk about emptiness. They don't not talking about the emptiness of inherent existence. Okay, go
Right.
on.
So now, does that mean, according to the Chitta Mantra view, that the mind and the external object are of different natures?
No, they're of one. They're of one entity.
So
They're-
that means,
they're-
so that's
they're
that
the
was my
same
original
substance.
that was my original question. The technical term of the same entity, is that the same? Is that also, is that mutually inclusive with same nature?
I think so. Yeah,
Okay.
they're the
All right.
same. Okay, Anna.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, Anna. You can put your hand down now. Anna, you must be tired.
And it might be too premature to ask this question, and I may just wait for another class, but sometimes I feel like I almost have a good handle of the Madhyamaka view, the Prasangika view. And as soon as we throw in the Siti Mantran, I get the two, I start to get my wires get mixed up. So I was wondering if you could briefly, because I'm needing to pull back and get this straight in my head, could we use the robin as an example, how we see that, both of the Prasangika view and then of the Siti Mantran view, the Madhyamaka view and the Siti Mantran view? Could we do that?
Well, yeah, very briefly, Chitta Matra view generally is that when we have any kind of conscious event, consciousness, right? Sem or chitta. Chitta is the word for sem in Tibetan. Tibetan word sem, like mind, right? Generally, mind is a subject. It can be the object of other minds, but generally we say mind is a subject that has an object. Say, I consciousness, mind, has an object, robin, or bluebird, or whatever, you know. The Chitta Matra says that the appearance of an external world is an illusion. That the appearance of an external world, well, let's say, they don't say that an external world is an illusion. They say the appearance of an external world as being a separate substance, separate entity from the mind is an illusion. We do say there is an external world, an appearance of an external world, but the fact that it appears to be different substance from the mind that's perceiving it is an illusion. In the same way, in a dream, you know, is there an external, you know, you're in the classroom, you're doing the final exam for your college degree, and you're freaking out and you're worried, and then you wake up and you saw it was just a dream. Was that classroom a different entity than your mind that you dreamed about? No, that's an example that they give to say, like that, like in a dream, you know, it seems like they're external objects from the mind, but they are all the same entity as the mind. Okay? The elephant in your dream, or the dog that's chasing you down the path, or something that you're afraid of. When you wake up, you say, oh, it's just a dream. There was no external dog there, right?
Wouldn't Prasangika agree with that though, right there, that part?
Yeah, but that doesn't mean that follows for the actual world.
Sure.
Okay. So Prasangika would say that the appearance of an external world arises from our collective karma that we have accumulated in past lives, along with the other sentient beings of this world system. All of the beings perceive generally the same thing. They may perceive it a little bit differently, pleasantly or unpleasantly, with bad eyes or good eyes or whatever, but generally that world seems to be external to each of them. And Prasangika says that appearance of an external world is true. There is an external world that comes about from the collective karma of sentient beings that's not the same nature as their consciousness. In Tantra, different story. We won't get into that right now. Okay, Richard.
Hi.
Hi.
There seem to be an awful lot of trees at the moment, and I'm having a little bit of difficulty understanding, the forest and where all of this is heading.
Right.
So I wrote something out, and I just wanted to make sure that I understand the context in which these particular passages are going on. And I wrote, it seems that what he is saying is that realizing suchness, the selflessness of persons, does have benefits, but they are temporary. And to that extent, he's cutting the opponent some slack.
Well, hold on. So suchness generally is not a word that's used by the Hinayana. Suchness is a synonym of emptiness of inherent existence for Prasangika.
But
So
it seems as if
selflessness of persons that the Hinayana is talking about here is not, when you realize that, you wouldn't say they would not say they've realized suchness. Suchness comes into the Prasangika explanation that they have not realized suchness. They've only realized the gross selflessness of persons, which is not the way that...
Okay, fair enough. Okay. I could have sworn that there were parts where it seems as if he's saying that they are equating suchness with the emptiness of the selflessness of persons, but not a phenomena.
That's not the case. Suchness refers to the emptiness of persons, the subtle emptiness, actual emptiness of inherent existence of persons and phenomena.
Okay.
That can be called the selflessness of persons and the selflessness of phenomena.
So let me back up then and revise what I wrote. I just want to make sure that I understand the context here. I want to try to understand the forest. It seems that what he is saying is that realizing the selflessness of persons does have benefits, but they are temporary. And to that extent, he's cutting his opponent some slack. Yet realizing only the selflessness of persons, while worthwhile for permanent benefits, the Prasangika states that permanent benefits require a realization of the emptiness of persons and of all phenomena. Is that a rough idea?
Almost right, but it's not as though he's cutting them some slack there. What he's saying is that there is a benefit to realizing this gross selflessness of persons. Prasangika states that the lack of a self-supporting, substantially existent person, which is called the gross selflessness of persons. That has benefit to realize that. It is true that we lack a self-supporting, substantially existent person.
Right.
Realizing that does reduce some of the delusions, but only temporarily. In the same way, as we'll be seeing, in the same way in the mundane vipassana. Mundane vipassana means two kinds of vipassana, penetrative insight, mundane and supramundane. Mundane vipassana means sitting here, meditating, I'm in the desire realm, right? With a desire realm mind. Looking with Vipassana, looking at the defects of the desire realm, the delusions of the desire realm, and looking at the benefits of the first concentration, analyzing that again and again, with mundane vipassana, having achieved already tranquil abiding, can lead one's mind to enter into the state of the first concentration. My body is still here, but my mind temporarily in that meditative state is a mind of the first concentration. And it is at that point, the delusions of the desire realm will not appear in that mind. I won't have desire for stracciatella ice cream or, tapioca pudding, some of my favorites, because the mind has temporarily abandoned. Usually in the texts on concentration, they just use the word abandon. They've abandoned those delusions in the sense that they are not present at that time. But when you arise from that meditation, and even for some time after that, maybe the delusions of the desire realm are suppressed. They're not manifest. But over time, as your concentration, the effects of your concentration diminish, the seeds of those delusions can cause the delusions to arise again. So they weren't really abandoned in the sense that they will never return. So what he's saying is that in the case of the realizing the lack of a self-supporting, substantially existent person, realizing the gross selflessness of persons is similar to that in that it suppresses the afflictions so that it seems like you are free of them. It goes further than mundane vipassana. The mundane vipassana can eliminate the delusions of the desire realm once you achieve the first concentration. It can eliminate the delusions, suppress the delusions of the first concentration when you achieve the second concentration, and so forth, all the way to the peak of cyclic existence. When you achieve the peak of cyclic existence, the fourth formless concentration, you've eliminated temporarily, suppressed temporarily, all of the delusions of all of the lower realms, except you still have the delusions of the fourth formless concentration. You can't, there's nothing higher to go to suppress those delusions. Whereas Lama Tsongkhapa says, through meditating on the gross selflessness of persons, which is the Hinayana approach here, right? Lack of a self-supporting, substantially existent person, you can suppress all the delusions of the desire realm, the first, second, third, fourth concentration of the form realm, the first, second, third, and fourth concentration of the formless realm. You can even suppress the delusions of the fourth concentration. You don't abandon them in the sense that they'll never come back. So in one sense, it's a little bit superior to just mundane vipassana. They all have benefit, in that when you're in those states of mind, when you have that realization fresh in your mind, ordinary delusions of the desire realm and the other realms are suppressed. You appear to ordinary people to be like an arhat, which may be the reason why people who achieve those realizations, just the gross self, realize the gross selflessness of persons, other people said, oh, they're arhat, Richard is an arhat now. He's realized this selflessness of persons, which is the gross selflessness of persons, not the subtle selflessness of persons that President Gika says. And therefore, he seems to be free of them. But later, maybe years later, he's walking down the road and some cart comes by and the wheel sprays mud on his robes and he gets angry. And say, oh, he fell from his realization. He was an arhat who fell. He was never an arhat to begin with. No offense, Richard, maybe you were arhat. But if you had only realized the gross selflessness of persons, those delusions were suppressed in when you were close to meditation or in meditation, they wouldn't be present. Those delusions wouldn't be present. But when you arose from that meditation, as the seeds of the delusions are still there, the delusions are only suppressed when some circumstance arises to aggravate that delusion, anger or whatever, attachment, that a delusion can arise again. So they were never true arhats to begin with. Okay. Sean, I thought there was someone else that had their hand up that you said, oh, Ida. You were first.
Thank you, Venerable. Just something to think about that I'm thinking about. Mind, you mentioned mind and karma creates, forms worlds, correct? Am I understanding that correctly? So
mind creates karma. It
mind creates
karma.
karma.
Individual karma and collective karma, right?
Right.
So the collective karma that we create is the cause of the appearance of the environmental world. In the Abhidharma Kosha, it says the world and the inhabitants therein all arise from karma.
Okay. So when all sentient beings become enlightened, what happens to the two truths? What happens to conventional truth?
Well, there's still memory of conventional truth. There's still, there are, if every single sentient being, there's, long philosophical discussions about this. What if when the end of samsara, everyone has become enlightened, are there still trees? Is there still Walmart in the town next door or something? The omniscient mind remembers everything that happened in the past, right? So there's still the appearance, there's still a consciousness that knows this is how things appeared, but there is no longer, there's no sentient being. Well, let's say when you achieve Buddhahood, from your own side, there is no appearance of dependent arisings as being existing from their own side, right? There still is dependent origination, but how it appears to the enlightened mind, how does the Buddha know how the tree exists? It's not as though from the Buddha's own side, the tree appears to be inherently existent or even conventionally existent. The Buddha knows that by means of knowing sentient beings' minds, sentient beings who are still deluded, how it appears to them. So the Buddha could say, see that tree over there. It's not as though the tree is appearing to the Buddha's mind directly. The Buddha knows what we are seeing by knowing our minds. It's a subtle question that I would say you don't have to worry about right now. Okay. So let me just go a little bit further. However, the statements about how one can traverse through the 10 bodhisattva grounds as well as the 3 final stages, that means when it says final stages, that means not the path of accumulation and preparation, but the final path of seeing, meditation, and no more learning, the 3 final stages of the 5 paths. These a Madhyamaka will interpret as provisional. The same is true as the example cited above. So then, although one meditates on the 16 aspects, the 16 characteristics such as impermanence, permanent suffering, empty and self, it is a realization of the selflessness of persons as defined above that is asserted by the other Buddhist schools to be the actual path that frees one from afflictions. The other Buddhist paths generally say that it is possible to reach liberation, to abandon all of the afflictions, the acquired and innate afflictions, by means of meditating on the lack of a self-supporting, substantially existent person. That's the viewpoint of the non-Prasangika. The Abhidharma Samuchaya, written by a Sangha, the Compendium of Abhidharma, for example, because that is written generally from the Chittamatra point of view, not from the Madhyamaka point of view, nor from the Prasangika point of view. The Compendium of Abhidharma, for example, explains how it is the focused meditation of selflessness, meaning the gross selflessness of persons. They would say it's the selflessness of person. They would say it's the subtle selflessness of person. Prasangika would say it's the gross selflessness of person. How it is the focused mentation of selflessness that eliminates the afflictions, while the 15 other characteristics, remember there's 16 characteristics of the Four Noble Truths, 4 characteristics of the truth of suffering, 4 of origin, and so forth, that the other 15 characteristics are for helping to thoroughly purify the afflictions. They're helping to understand emptiness, empty and selfless. In line with this, the exposition of valid cognition, I think that's how he's translating Pramanavartika, right? Pramanavartika. In line with this, the exposition of valid cognition, the Pramanavartika states, one is freed through the view of emptiness. The other contemplations support that. Or as Jeffrey says, one is liberated through the view of emptiness. The other meditations are for the sake of that. The same way that in the Prasangika we say, of the 6 perfections, Shantideva says in Bodhisattva Charayatara, when he gets to the 6th perfection, he says all of the other perfections were for the point of getting to understand this, charity, generosity, morality, patience, enthusiastic perseverance, concentration. Those first 5 perfections are all expounded on and practiced in order to get to the perfection of wisdom. So here he's saying one is freed through the view of emptiness. The other contemplations of these other 15 aspects support that. So there's a little bit of confusion because of the first of these 4 aspects of the First Noble Truth, impermanence, suffering, empty and selfless. So generally the Hinayana is saying selfless is the one. Here it's talking about empty. Okay, so there's slight different meanings of these. Misled by the phrase, the view of emptiness, in that quotation we just said, one is freed through the view of emptiness. Misled by the phrase, the view of emptiness here, even some Indian masters assert that this refers to the view realizing suchness. This may be what Richard was referring to, he read ahead. So that's a mistake. When he says some Indian, some Indian masters, Jeffrey mentions who they are, Shantarakshita, Kamalashila, Chetari, Prajnakaragupta, and so forth. Those were some masters. They assert that this refers to the view of suchness. This is decidedly not the meaning. Okay, I'm going to stop there. So you read ahead. I'll just say here it refers to the view realizing the person is empty of a self-sufficient, substantially self-sufficient, substantial reality. Okay, highlight. Okay, so that's where we're starting here. Ida, you have a question?
One quick clarification. So if I'm understanding this correctly, a yogic direct valid cognizer has three realizations, correct? Direct realization of subtle impermanence, direct realization of the core selflessness of persons, and direct realization of the subtle selflessness of persons. Is that correct?
You could put it that way, but there are other things that it can realize, but those are the main ones. The subtle impermanence, which is not amenable to, perception by our ordinary senses. You need to realize it with a mental direct perceiver, and that particular mental direct perceiver is called a yogic direct perceiver. The gross selflessness of persons, the lack of a self-supporting, substantially existent person, that's also realized by the yogic direct perceiver, and emptiness, which you could say is the subtle selflessness of persons, but it also includes the selflessness of, or the emptiness of phenomena. Those are the main ones. So those are, other mental direct perceivers that are not called yogic direct perceivers, like realizing another person's continuum, having direct realization of what Ida is thinking. Or maybe some of you know what I'm thinking, because you have a yogic direct, you have one of the cities, the common cities, SIDDHI, not CITY, realizations of, knowing others' continuums, or the existence of past and future lives. Those generally are not called yogic direct perceivers. Those other kinds of mental direct perceivers. So yogic direct perceivers are generally ones that lead to suppressing of the delusions directly by realizing, subtle impermanence.
May I ask something else? The empowering condition of a yogic direct perceiver, that is meditative equipoise, correct?
According to the tenet system. So what that means is generally, every consciousness has three conditions: an empowering condition, a object condition, like the object that you're seeing, and what's the third one called, Paul? The
own empowering condition of the
simultaneously.
Previous
moment of consciousness, usually conditions. So, I consciousness has as its empowering condition the I faculty. The consciousness enters into that in order to be able to see objects. Yogic direct perceiver has as its empowering condition. How did you put it, Ida? You have to unmute.
Yeah. Meditative equipoise, the union of calm abiding and
right. So it has insight. You can't have a yogic direct perceiver until you've accomplished that state that acts as the empowering condition for that yogic direct perceiver. Okay. So a lot of sort of incidental things that are coming up. This is why it's useful when studying a text like this, to have some familiarity with the tenets and all of these other subjects that often are taught in preparation to studying Madhyamaka. So thank you for your patience. I've forgotten the name of the person that Jennifer, do you remember, Paul, what the name of the person was?
Freddie English.
Freddie English, yeah, not Freddie Mercury, Freddie English. So we're going to do some dedication prayers and think particularly of this friend of Jennifer's who's in his last days, Freddie English. Karen, would you like to put up the dedication prayers? There we go. Okay. So I think there's some dedication prayers before that, right? There we go. Oh, isn't there some prayer due to these merits, due to these virtues? There we go, dedication prayers. Due to these virtues, this is Gewa Di. Nirdu Dag means, may I quickly. Lama Sangye Drupgyur Ne means, having achieved the state of a Guru Buddha. Droa Chikyang Malupa, all sentient beings, not leaving out even one. It says, all living, all migrators, not leaving out even one. May I, Dei Sala Gopasha, may I set them in that enlightened state. The word set in the translation is lead in the previous line there. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen, arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. And then think in particular of all the mother sentient beings out there right now, taking Freddie English as an example. Think may, in their future lives, may they quickly meet, as a result of the merits that I've created today, the virtues I've created today, the collection of merits and collection of wisdom, may they quickly, when they pass away, find rebirth as a human, encounter the perfect Mahayana Guru, and lead and be led into the state of enlightenment very quickly. And then long life prayer, you who uphold the Muni's moral code, Shakyamuni Buddha's morality, serving as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, refers to Lama Tsongkhapa's doctrine, masterfully accomplishing magnificent prayers honoring the three jewels, Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live long. And finally, to all our gurus, Dalai Lama, and so forth, you who are eyes for me to view all the infinite scriptures, you allow me to see those scriptures and understand them. You are the supreme gateway for the fortunate ones traveling to liberation, engaging with skillful means, moved by love. All illuminating spiritual friends, please live a long and stable life. So thank you very much. Look forward to seeing you in our last class before January, next week. Read ahead, note your questions, and look forward to seeing you then. Take care.
Thank you, Venerable George.
You know, I used to do research on this in this topic many years ago and collect antiquarian books about this kind of stuff. So
Yeah.
it piqued my interest, you know. And so I did some research and I found like two obscure articles about Jayananda in some peer-reviewed research paper, So basically he was from Kashmir. See, he was this Kashmiri guy, monk, and in the 1100s, but he was actually a pretty big dude because he was the national preceptor for the Shisha state, which was in the western Tarim basin, in the.
So people understand, Kashmir is part of India. So he was an Indian. You say
Right.
Kashmiri, he was Indian. Yeah.
And so he was, and there was a relatively powerful state in China, and kind of eastern China, but western, like northwest of Tibet, northeast of Tibet, kind of in the in the eastern part of the the Taklamakan Desert, the Tarim Basin, that area, right?
Okay.
So there were the Tanguts, there were these Tangut tribes. So anyway, so there was a Shisha state, and he was the national preceptor, which basically means that it was a very high honorific title given to high lamas, and they were only held by Tibetans, by the way. These national preceptors. Later on, they were only held by Tibetans, but he was, in Tibet at the time, and so he was made one of these things. But the interesting thing is that even though, so it looks like research shows that when he composed his commentary, right, that we've been talking about, it actually wasn't in India or in Tibet, but rather in Shisha. Well, when he was in Shisha in the mid 1100s.
Okay.
As the state preceptor.
Well, you should post those articles up on the Facebook page so others can read about the.
I can send the links. Unfortunately, I can't print them out because they're on JSTOR. Those of you who know.
Okay. If you print the links, that'll be good.
I can send the links, and you can look it up if you have a JSTOR account. But
You just
anyway,
need someone from a university to get that.
You can get free access as well.
Someone will have free. Someone will be able to. I think Paul maybe, or someone who has JSTOR access.
Right.
Anyway.
So in any case, and he also actually traveled back and forth between India and the Shisha province quite a bit. Quite a number of times, it seems. And he also had this famous supposedly like a debate within this monastery against this, the abbot of the monastery, and he won. And the abbot exiled himself to Mount Wutai. So he was.
Okay, interesting fellow.
So he was about 150 years before Tsongkhapa. So relatively close in time.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Shaka. We look forward to seeing those in more detail. I can get all the juicy bits for you Jayananda fans. So look forward to seeing you.
Thank you, Venerable George.
All right.
Thank you.